When people think about the fall of Rome, they usually imagine barbarians leaping over the walls, legions collapsing, or emperors murdered inside marble palaces. Yet empires rarely fall because of damage from the outside. They decay from within, and one of the greatest sources of that decay is always money. Rome did not fall solely because of invasions or corruption. Rome collapsed because it lost its money. And the lessons drawn from that collapse are still valid today for every modern economy that believes it can play with money without consequences. First, let's set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, this coin was almost pure silver. Roman soldiers were paid with it. Merchants conducted their trade with it. Ordinary people stored their savings in it. The denarius was not just a medium of exchange, it was trust forged into metal. Faith in Rome and the value of its money were one and the same. As long as there was trust in the empire, there was trust in its currency. But maintaining an empire required enormous amounts of money. Legions had to be fed, roads and aqueducts built, wars financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was defending its borders against Germanic tribes, fighting the Parthians in the east and struggling with unrest at home. Tax revenues were no longer sufficient to cover rising military expenses. So the emperors turned to one of the oldest tricks in history, debasing the currency. Raising taxes directly always provoked resistance. Instead, the silver content of the denarius was gradually reduced. The numbers tell the story. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius was about 95% silver. By the early 3rd century, under Caracalla, this fell to around 50%. By the reign of Gallienus, silver content dropped below 5%, nearly disappearing entirely. What was once an almost pure silver coin became little more than bronze coated with a thin layer of silver. The people noticed. The weight of the coin had changed. Its color had changed. Its value had clearly fallen. Inflation was inevitable because the money no longer had real substance. What could once be bought with a single denarius now required dozens. This was not abstract economic theory. It devastated the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher wages to keep up with rising prices. Merchants began refusing debased coins, preferring gold or barter. Local economies collapsed. Trade shrank dramatically. As money lost credibility, emperors tried to solve the problem by minting even more worthless coins. They believed quantity could replace value. This was a vicious cycle repeated many times throughout history. The crisis reached its peak during the period known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos. Invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse followed one another relentlessly. Emperors rose to power and were killed in rapid succession. Yet beneath all this political turmoil lay a collapsed financial system. Taxes were demanded in constantly devalued currency. Farmers chose to abandon their land rather than pay. Trade networks disintegrated. The state resorted to desperate measures, price controls, forced labor to keep the system alive. None of it worked. Emperor Diocletian made one final attempt. In AD 301, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices. Thousands of goods and services, from grain to wages, were assigned price ceilings. Violators faced death. The result was disastrous. A worthless currency could not be made valuable by law. Black markets exploded overnight. Official trade nearly stopped. People learned quickly, broken money cannot be repaired by decree. Eventually, Rome was forced to abandon the denarius entirely. Around AD 312, Constantine the Great introduced the gold solidus with fixed purity. This coin brought long-lasting stability to the Eastern Roman Empire. But for the Western Empire, it was already too late. The monetary system was hollowed out. The army could no longer be financed, trade had collapsed, and trust was gone. Rome's fall was not a single event, but a long process of unraveling, and the monetary crisis was one of its sharpest threads. So what does this tell us today? The collapse of money, is always the collapse of states and empires. Rome believed it could deceive its citizens with coins that looked the same but carried less value. Modern states believe they can play the same game, eroding debt through inflation, printing money, manipulating interest rates, but the outcome never changes. The cost is always paid by the public. Wealth disappears. Trust collapses. This lesson did not end with Rome. It has repeated itself in every major inflationary crisis in history. Jump to the 20th century. After World War I, Germany was crushed under the weight of the Treaty of Versailles. The state printed money to cover its debts. In 1923, hyperinflation exploded. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war rose to 200 billion marks within a few years. People carried their wages in wheelbarrows. Pensioners lost their life savings. Debtors were rescued, asset holders grew stronger. Money became meaningless. And this economic devastation paved the way for political radicalism. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the 2000s. By 2008, annual inflation reached 89 trillion%. Prices doubled daily. Eventually, the country abandoned its own currency altogether. But there is no need to look only at extremes. The Roman model exists in developed economies as well. In 1971, the United States removed the dollar from the gold standard. Money became anchored not to tangible value, but to trust in the state. Since then, debt has surged, the money supply expanded, and purchasing power steadily eroded. What $1 bought in 1971 now requires more than $6. The paper is the same, the number is the same, but the substance is gone. Governments present inflation as growth. They market wage increases as prosperity while always concealing faster rising costs. They sell debt as investment while financing consumption. Just like Roman emperors, they insist that nothing fundamental has changed. What is dangerous today is the global nature of this system. Rome's crisis was imperial, Germany's was national, Zimbabwe's was local. Today, the entire world rests on debt, fiat currency, and central banks ready to print without limit. The next crisis does not appear likely to remain confined to a single country. The lessons for individuals are clear. Inflation is not a mistake, it is a policy. It functions like a silent tax. Real wealth does not reside in banknotes, but in assets that preserve value, land, skills, production, resources. And stability is never permanent. People living in Rome's early centuries could not imagine their money becoming this worthless. When money loses its reality, society begins to rot. Contracts break down, trade stalls, armies dissolve, and states lose legitimacy. Barbarians may break down the gates, but the fatal blow always comes from the treasury. History does not repeat itself exactly, but if you fail to understand it, it will destroy you all the same. If this narrative gave you a new perspective, subscribe, because history has already provided the answers.